Buttons are one of the principal controls for interacting with a Visual Studio application. We'll find the button control under Common Controls, and typically what I do is simply drag and draw a button. Though you can choose the button tool and simply click on your form, or you can drag a button. I'm going to delete those last two. Let's look at some of the properties for a button. Of course, we have the name property, and you want to give it a name that's meaningful because you're almost always going to refer to a button in code. And Hungarian notation is to start a button name with the letters BTN. I'm going to name this BTN red, and I'm going to have this button coded so that when we click it, it's going to turn the form red. So we have the name property, just as we saw in the text box and labels. There's also a text property that we've also seen in other controls, and this controls the text that is displayed on the button itself. So you can think of it as the caption of the button. I'm just going to type in red. And of course we have size property that we've already seen in other controls, and location property. Typically I modify those visually by dragging and moving buttons around. We can change the back color using the same three palettes that we've seen elsewhere, custom, web, and system. That will control what's inside the button. And then there is a forecolor, which would change the color of the text. And we have the font property, just as we've seen in labels and text boxes. There is an enabled property that by default is set to true, and if I were to set that to false, it means when the user would click on this button, nothing would happen. The code would not run. So we can disable buttons by setting the enabled property to false. In most cases, we want to have that set to true unless we want to have some contextualized buttons that are only viable when certain conditions are met. The buttons by default have sort of a 3D appearance. In fact, if I were to test this, right now we have no code written to the button, so nothing's going to happen. But you notice that when I point to it, I get a shade difference in terms of it getting the focus. And if I click on it, I sort of get this push-in effect, of 3D effect of a push button. There are different styles of buttons, and those come under the property of flat style. The standard is what we primarily would use, but there is a pop-up, and so when I point to it, it gives a little bit of a raised appearance and then pushes in. There's a system button. Really not much different from the standard. And then a flat style button. Doesn't have that 3D appearance. Still has some interaction. And with the flat style, we also have a flat appearance property that is controlled by several sub-properties. And I could actually change, say, the border color to some other color. Let's make it blue. I could change the border size. So instead of 1 pixel, maybe I want it to be 3. And I could change the colors in terms of what happens when the user clicks on it or mouse down, or when they point to it, which is a mouse over. I can have different colors pop up there. So when I run this, I get sort of a dark cyan when I point to it, and when I click on it, I'm getting yellow. We can also control foreground and background colors with code and different events. I'm going to change the button back to the standard style. I'm going to get rid of the text. And I can also assign an image to this button. Just as we did with the label, I'm going to assign this image of a house to it. Click OK. I can choose how I want that image displayed as far as the alignment. I'm going to leave it in middle center, but I'll make my button a little bit larger. And then one last property that we've seen elsewhere as well is the visible property. And I might want to hide a button from a user at certain points while the application is running. And if I set that to false here in the properties, initially when I start my program, that button would not be displayed. Oftentimes we'd set the visibility to true or false within code based on context. What is the various situation? Let me set this back to true, run it again, and there we have our push button with the house icon.